All weekend, the nation, well, at least one half of the country, has been reeling from the Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs v. Jackson, overturning 50 years of precedent which guaranteed women the right to choose and the right to make decisions over their own reproductive health. From DC to California, activists took to the streets condemning the decision and vowing to fight back. Today, we're asking, where do we go from here? All coming up next.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
On Friday last week, in a 6-3 conservative opinion, the Supreme Court overruled Roe v. Wade and basically ruled that abortions are not protected under the U.S. Constitution. The majority said because abortion rights are not specifically enumerated in the Constitution, they could not be protected. Legal scholars have criticized the logic of the court and blasted it for engaging in what some call partisanship games. The court's ruling now leaves it up to each state to make its own determination about women's reproductive health and abortions. Conservatives and those who characterize themselves as pro-life celebrated the decision, which, as many know, has been a game plan and a strategic goal of the conservative right for more than 4 decades. But while some are celebrating, millions of women and men, and even the president and vice president, lamented the decision. President Biden calling it cruel and stating that it was a sad day for the court and the country. Now, immediately following the issuance of the decision, 9 states banned abortions, and at least 16 others, through a series of trigger laws and other legislation, plan to restrict women's rights to choose over the next 30 days. When it's all said and done, the country will be divided. 26 or more states will make it impossible, if not very difficult, for a woman to have an abortion, while other states like California and New York and Illinois will continue to allow women to have choice over their bodies and their reproductive health. This patchwork of laws has caused utter chaos as women, providers, activists, and even big companies like Amazon are scrambling to make sense out of the Dobbs ruling and its practical implications. And lost in all of the chatter about the Dobbs decision are the real life stories of women who've had to have abortions, not because they were promiscuous or because they somehow wanted to snuff out life, as some pro-lifers claim, but because it was a medical decision to save their own lives. My first guest is Ebony Robinson. She is a mother, she's a wife, she's a professional, HR professional, and she's a resident of Texas who was required to have an abortion to save her own life. And she's here today to tell her own story about really, I think, what we should know about the ongoing debate about women's right to choose. Good morning and welcome, Ebony.
Good morning, Areva.
Thank you. I just want to thank you first. You saw a post that I made on LinkedIn in terms of, just really expressing how I was feeling about the decision in Dobbs and particularly the impact it would have on African-American women, the disproportionate impact. And you responded in a private DM message to me sharing your own abortion story. And I was so moved by your story that I wrote back to you and asked you if you were willing to come on the special report and to share your story. And you courageously said yes. So I just want to thank you for being willing to share the story. So I'm one of those talking heads that you see on television, one of those pundits, those experts. Yeah. And I've been on TV all weekend talking about this case, and I've been listening to others like me. And I just want to make sure that the real life stories of people like you don't get lost as kind of the outrage machine that I'm a part of, I have to admit, voices our opinions. So I would just start by asking you, please share with me what you shared in that really powerful DM message.
Absolutely. First, thank you for giving me space to share my story. This will be the first time that even my family and friends will hear exactly what I went through. As I told you in the DM, this was categorized medically as a stillbirth. But my truth is, because of the state of Texas and the laws that were here prior to Roe v. Wade being reversed, is that I had to go to an abortion clinic. My OBGYN was not able to do a DNC at the hospital because genetics testing would supersede or take too long to come back from the results from that. The specialist, after several visits, amniocentesis, and testing that they could do in office, decided that the condition was lethal that was going on with my daughter, Sage, that the condition could possibly harm my life and hers, that she would have no viability outside the womb if I was able to carry her the full 9 months. I was 21 weeks and 5 days, and the state of Texas required 22 weeks. And of course, with genetic testing taking 10 weeks, do the math, I'd be full term and risk my life. I was already having issues with breathing, very exhausted, could not rest, couldn't sleep, and I slept in a chair. So I had my abortion. I walked through crowds calling me a murderer. The state of Texas requires for foster care, adoption care, pamphlet to be given to each mother. You wait 24 hours. I had to go through that entire process, even though I had specialist confirmation that it was a lethal condition.
Let me ask you, Ebony, at the time, you were already a mother, right?
Yes, I have a 15-year-old.
And so how old was your daughter at the time that you went through this process?
14. We just made the year mark. That happened June 12th of 2021. And the year mark was just a few weeks ago. So she was 14. She was excited about her baby sister. It was something that my husband and I wanted to give her. And, unfortunately, it didn't end the way that we thought it would.
So you mentioned in Texas that there was a 22-week cutoff. So in Texas, if you were beyond 22 weeks, you were not able to get an abortion? Was that the law pre the Scott's decision?
That is correct, yes. And so my husband and I weighed our options to do it prior to the 22 weeks. That was our first choice, or go to New Mexico, because we are we're fairly close to the border to where we could have gone and traveled there, because their window is a little bit longer. I cannot remember the exact time frame, but it may be 23 weeks, 24 weeks, but it would give us a little bit more time. But considering that genetics testing would take so long, it just didn't make sense for us to even wait. I couldn't take another day of carrying her, knowing that I wouldn't be able to keep her.
And your doctors knew that, as you just said, that your daughter, Sage, that you guys had named her, would not be viable outside the womb, and that carrying her much longer would endanger your own life. But you said there was some genetic testing that would have confirmed this. In the absence of that, the hospital that you would have gone to wasn't going to allow your doctor to, I guess, surgically abort the baby?
Correct. And it didn't have to be surgically. I could have pushed her out naturally, but I wasn't able to even get the medication, do it in a hospital setting. I had to go to an abortion clinic in order to have that done, because the testing that would have confirmed that she had several anomalies that was going to cause her to have a lethal condition outside my womb wouldn't be back in time. But my specialist and their team, from the ultrasounds, the advanced ultrasounds, the amnio, they knew her limbs were short. There were a lot of things going on with her that just was not going to allow her life outside of my womb. I saw it on the ultrasound. I went in for a routine visit. I could see that her limbs were short, both her arms, her legs. I noticed it, and so did the tech. But of course, they can't tell me what's going on. And my physician sent me directly to a specialist office. And that's how we confirmed. And the first thing she said is, "I'm sorry, this is lethal."
Wow. How many weeks were you when you got that news?
I was 21 weeks and 5 days.
Oh,
and so
right at that cutoff of the
yes.
22. Did you know prior to getting that information from your specialist that Texas had a law that cut off at 22 weeks for legal abortions?
I did not. I knew nothing about abortions. It wasn't something that I planned to do. It wasn't even on my radar. I'm not a person that judges a woman if she chooses that, but it was not my choice.
And I know in the DM, Ebony, you told me that you grew up in the church and you consider yourself very religious. So how difficult was it for you when you learned that you couldn't go to a typical hospital, you couldn't get the medication that you needed, to go have induced labor, that you would have to go to an abortion clinic?
If I'm perfectly honest, my religion was the furthest thing from my mind. I grew up in church. My grandfather is a preacher. He was a preacher. And so I know the Bible, I know my beliefs, and I stand firm on those. I also know that my perspective has changed as far as my religion is concerned. And when I say that, it has made me stronger. It's made me a stronger Christian, but that has nothing to do with me wanting to control a woman's body and tell her what she should not or should do. We all answer differently and one by one when we get to heaven, as far as I'm concerned. And so I'm not here to judge that.
Other than your husband, did you tell anyone else
About having to go to the abortion clinic? My parents knew. They were here with me. My mom stayed with us for quite some time, several months afterwards, because I suffered from postpartum depression. And so my parents knew. My trusted official, as far as my aunt, she married us. She's a minister. She was here with us. She prayed with us. Majority of my family was here, my cousins. They stood beside us. So they knew that I had to go to an abortion clinic. They didn't know the trauma associated with it, that the medication didn't work when I first went into the operating room.
Hold on, I want to stop you. I want to talk about that trauma, because
Okay.
I'm so moved by that walk. And it was during COVID. And so tell us again, help us understand. Because again, we see on television, we see people outside of abortion clinics who are picketing and who are, chanting murderer, murderer, murderer. But I don't know if we really get a full sense of what that's like for a woman like you who's having to make that walk into that clinic.
I just wish those folks would realize that there's more than one reason that we're there. And if they are so concerned about life, they should consider the woman walking up that sidewalk, that we have to deal with the decisions that we make each and every day for the rest of our lives, for the rest of my life. I will never forget that experience, to look at someone holding a cross in one hand and then calling me a murderer in the same breath. I'm, like I said, a Christian. I understand that he is who without sin should not cast the first stone. And I could not for the life of me even, fathom why they didn't remember that scripture. It was hard. It was a challenge. It haunts me to this day. I've been through some intense therapy to try and work through that trauma. But, my husband wasn't able to go in with me. He had to sit in a parking lot. It was terrible. I don't know what his experience was like. He's military, so he's very stoic, but I know that it was hurtful and painful, and he felt empty not being able to walk in there with me and hold my hand. And it was scary. I mean, the building was cold. Just the women in there, just the devastation all around. You felt it when you walked in the door. It was just a very traumatic experience.
And the reason I wanted you to tell that part of it, Ebony, is because, again, I think sometimes there's this point that is made by people who call themselves pro-lifers that somehow there's this gleeful experience and women are just, that they're cavalier, perhaps, or they're nonchalant about this decision and not recognizing, as you just described, this is probably one of the biggest and most difficult decisions you've had to make in your life. And you said when you walked in, that was the look on the faces of the women that you encountered. Tell us about the 14-year-old. I know you mentioned a teenager that you encountered.
Areva, she is always on my mind. A 14-year-old had been molested by her grandfather. Her mother was accompanying her to the clinic for her to abort her child that was a product of that molestation. And she wept in her mother's arms. Her mother profusely apologized. And oh my goodness, she is more of my concern than even myself sometimes. Even in my therapy sessions, I always talk about her. I don't know her name. I can't tell you what she looked like because of my own grief. I try and block out certain points. But just devastating that the laws do not even gift us any type of options when it comes to rape, molestation, anomalies. All of us are not there just because we simply just don't want a child. But even if that is the case, it is not the law's presence that we need.
Right. And sometimes, Ebony, we hear pro-lifers, again, I'm going to say characterize, people who
Mhm.
characterize themselves as pro-lifers, talk about the PTSD and the
Mhm.
fact that women often regret having an abortion. I heard a woman say, particularly as it related to African American and Latino women, that they don't know what they're doing, they don't know what they're getting into, and they all have immediate regrets. And I want you to separate, because it sounds like you weren't regretting having the abortion, you were regretting the process,
Mhm.
trauma imposed on you by these so-called pro-lifers,
Mhm.
and the fact that you were losing a child that you wanted and that you could have died. I mean, it wasn't like, oh my God, I've made the worst decision to have this abortion. So help us understand that distinction, because these people would have you believe that there's all of this trauma associated with having had the abortion.
Mhm. My husband and I made the best decision for our child. She was our first thought. She was not the last one. She wasn't an afterthought. She was our priority. Making sure that her quality of life was going to be a priority was one of the things that was at the forefront of our decision. Had they told us that, oh, she'll just, have some differences, but she'll be viable and she'll have full scope of life, just maybe she's just a little shorter, those things wouldn't have bothered us. She could have had downs, anything. Those differences would not have bothered us. But the fact that her chest was too small, where she couldn't even take a breath, a ventilator wouldn't have helped her outside of my womb. I was her only protection. And in that, we made the decision to protect her and make sure that we ended her life in the most peaceful way, not knowing that it would be traumatic, and to ensure that I was here for my husband and my existing daughter. And then perhaps we could try again if this wasn't a genetic issue, but the trauma associated with it, that whole decision-making process, it's not the abortion that is bothersome. It's not something I regret. I did what was best for my child. What I do regret is the manner in which it had to be done, and the fact that I had to walk through those protesters, that the state of Texas required me to come in one day, do an ultrasound when I had several from a specialist, and wait 24 hours before they could even start my 2-day process. Just that whole torture and the process is what bothers me. If I could have just gone to a hospital and held my little girl, that would have been amazing. Maybe I wouldn't be so traumatized. I carry her with me every day. She's in an urn right here. I have her footprints with me. That's the only piece of her that they were able to salvage, but I did not get to see her. They brought her to my husband and I in a bowl with a towel covering it and the chaplain praying over her.
Wow. Yeah. I'm just speechless, because what you are describing, yes, seems like should have been in a hospital room, in a labor and delivery department, in a major hospital, where you could have had your baby
Mm-hmm.
and had that time with her. You didn't need counseling, because they had to counsel you about adoption, right? You had to do some kind of,
Yeah.
here you are, a mother of 14, married to a military guy, master's degree, super smart, wonderful family. And I don't even know you, but I know all of that. So I just know that. You didn't need counseling about adoption. You weren't putting your baby up for adoption. You were already raising a child. You wanted a family.
Mm-hmm. I did. I wanted a family. This would be my husband's first biological child. We met when my daughter was 2, and he has been her rock and she's his. But I wanted to gift him that. I wanted us to have something together. And that was our mission, was to have a baby together. And she was our surprise baby, because we had gone through rounds of fertility treatments that did not work. And we had kind of tabled it. And I found out I was pregnant on Valentine's Day, which is my favorite holiday. And so we named her Sage, for wisdom, that we were wise enough to just take time, let go, and just have fun with even conception. So, I'm devastated that she's not here, but I know that the entire journey that I'm going through and have gone through is not just for me. And so when I learned about Roe v. Wade being overturned, I was devastated for all of the women who no longer have control over their bodies, who can't make the decision that my husband and I made to be safe and to live, because our lives are at stake. It's not just about us getting rid of a child because we're irresponsible. I waited for him, for marriage, and to have another child and do things the right way, to right my wrong. And this is the way it ended up. And I'm just devastated that the legal system has decided that they have a say.
And thank you for sharing that. And lots of women like yourself who want children, some single moms do it on their own, others like you who have supportive husbands. What is the message that you think we are missing in this big debate as activists are activating and activists are taking to the streets, elected officials are looking at what their options are? What is the most important message from someone who's been through this process like you that you think we need to make sure remains front and center in this debate?
Most important message for me is to make sure there's consideration for mom first and to allow the medical professionals to do their job. There should be no jeopardizing their licensing for helping a woman save her life, for making her own choice. Leave us alone. Let us have the balance and the peace that we need to make those tough decisions, because it's not easy and it's not just a quick procedure and a walk away. We have to live with this for the rest of our lives. I'm still dealing with the grief. It comes in waves. I could see a baby, I could see a pregnant woman, and I grieve her every single day. Some days are better than the others, and I'm able to finally say and articulate what's happened to me. So most important piece is just to leave us alone. We don't need the legal system to help us with our decisions that we make with our own bodies.
Yeah, it's so powerful. Yeah, we don't need the law in our medical appointments and in those rooms where women are making those choices. Just last question for you, Emily. Did you know about the horrible statistic in terms of Black women maternal health rates as you were talking to these specialists? The fact that Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in childbirth than white women. Did you know those stats as you were, again, having to make this decision?
I actually did, because only reason why is I had a great doula that helped me with my pregnancy and has been there alongside me, and she's just waiting for me to get pregnant again. But she is Black, and that is her goal, is to educate all of her moms to make sure that we are aware of those statistics and what we can do, whether that's midwifery or just having a doula by our side to help us advocate through the process, and even in delivery rooms, should we choose that. So I'm so grateful for Tequila and her doula services and just her sound mind. But she did educate me on the different maternal rates for Black women. So I was very cognizant of that. It was something, the reason why I even hired a doula was because I wanted to make sure that 15 years ago I had a baby and I was 25. And so it was a little different. I wanted to make sure that I was safe and that my medical team knew that even with their expertise, I had the final say, and I needed to be confident enough to do that and proceed in that manner. And she helped me do that.
All right. So are you and your husband trying again? Because it sounds like you guys want to expand that family.
We do. So we are going to try again. We said on the 1-year mark of Sage's passing that we were going to give it a go. We've been in a healing space. And so we're excited about that journey.
Well, thank you so much, Ebony, for reaching out to me, sending me that DM message, having the courage to share your story. We need to hear more stories like yours because, I think those of us who are trying to make sense out of this, those of us that work in the legal system, work in media, need to make sure that the voices of women like you remain front and center as we fight for choice for women. Because what you went through, having to walk into an abortion clinic and be maligned and attacked by people who say they are there to protect life, that's not how you protect life. Your life matters too. And thank you for just being willing to share that story. But best of luck to you and your husband. And love to see you have that second child added to your family.
Thank you. I'll keep you posted.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much again. All right. We've heard that very powerful story from Ebony about what it's like to have to walk through the doors of one of these abortion clinics and have, strangers, people you don't even know, accuse you of things they know nothing about and to attack you. And that's what is happening or will happen to women as they try to find where, if any place in their own states or have to travel to other states, we should expect that to continue as this debate about choice continues to rage in this country. My next guest is Dr. Mary Kate Lizotte, and she is a professor of political science at Augusta University. She's an expert in gender differences in public opinion and voting, and she's the author of Gender Differences in Public Opinion, Values, and Political Consequences. Good morning and welcome, Dr. Lizotte. I know that you had a chance to listen to Ebony's story. Given the work that you do, how common is that story? Someone saying, look, I had to go to a clinic to seek an abortion because of medical necessity to save my own life, but yet I was maligned and attacked in the way that she was.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I don't think that it's an uncommon story at all. I think, unfortunately, miscarriages, problems with pregnancy are very common. And even if you do have a miscarriage, you may need medical assistance and healing. And under these new laws in various states, you wouldn't be able to get that medical assistance. So even if your body has, decided to have a miscarriage, they won't be able to help you at a hospital if you need a follow-up procedure in order to completely heal from that. So yes, what Ebony went through and what women go through every day when it comes to pregnancy, it's not always a rosy story. It's not always a healthy, easy thing for a woman to go through. And so it's really unfortunate that so many women face these sorts of situations.
And I know, Professor Lizotte, you've been studying this for years. And one of the big questions now coming up, being asked by a lot of progressives and Democrats is why didn't Democrats codify Roe v. Wade over the last 50 years? From your research, from the work that you do, I know you can't answer for all Democrats that have been in office, but what, how would you answer that question? Or is there a good answer to it?
I think that there's a lot of reasons. And I think one of them is that for a while there were plenty of pro-life Democrats or Democrats who wanted to see abortion be safe, legal, and rare, not understanding that it cannot always be a rare occurrence. Sometimes, as what happened with Ebony, it's not really a choice that you're being given. I think that in addition to that, there was this sort of belief that it wasn't going to ever be overturned, that it was settled law. I mean, we even saw some of the justices who voted to overturn it argue that they believe that it was settled law and that they were not planning on overturning it, which is extremely problematic that they would lie before a Senate Judiciary Committee and say that sort of thing. But I think that that's another major reason why for a long time Democrats just figured, well, it's been taken care of, it's settled, we don't have to worry about it. And then in the last few years, they just really haven't had the opportunity with the Senate filibuster. They just really haven't been able to go ahead and have those sorts of votes because they need 60 individuals to agree to have a vote like that.
And you raise a good point about the recent appointees being Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, and Amy Coney Barrett, Trump appointees to the Supreme Court. And we saw AOC, junior Congresswoman from New York over the weekend, call out those appointees, Trump appointees, and basically call for their impeachment for lying under oath before the Senate confirmation hearing. We know specifically Kavanaugh and Gorsuch said that they believe the Roe decision was established precedent and that the principle of stare decisis would prevent the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And then we saw them vote completely opposite of what they said in those confirmation hearings. Do you think impeachment is appropriate in this situation?
I think that it's really hard to say one way or the other. There aren't a lot of formalized guidelines as to what would make it so that you would impeach a justice of the Supreme Court or force them to resign. Obviously there are other calls for impeachment or resigning for Justice Thomas, given his wife's connection to the January 6th riots or coup. So I think, this is something that Congress should be thinking about, should be addressing. There should be formalized, guidelines as to, at what point is justice, to be impeached. Usually, if they do resign, it's on their own accord. But I think that it's an important thing to start thinking about and investigating. And in the future, it would be useful to have set guidelines. I think it would be very unprecedented to go ahead and impeach someone because they misrepresented themselves in a Senate Judiciary hearing. But that doesn't mean that it can't happen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've actually seen some pretty prominent Democrats also say that impeachment would be appropriate, even though as a practical matter, as you know, to impeach someone and to remove them, you need a 2/3 vote in the Senate. And we know that would never happen. We saw even with Trump. Now, the fact that you can't get removal doesn't necessarily mean you don't go through the impeachment process. And there are, I think people are split, as you just said, on whether that should be the course of action versus putting something in place for future appointees that have to go before the confirmation hearing. I think I'm probably on the fence about it. I don't know if it's a good use of our time and our energy, particularly given these midterm elections and given this January 6th committee investigation. So it seems like we just have so many hot button issues that we have to deal with, trying to get those, impeaching them, knowing that the end result is not going to remove them from the court. I just don't know if it's a good use of our time. But let's talk about this fallout. You've been following and researching these issues around, gender issues, how they play out in public opinion, how they play out in voting. So the initial outrage was towards Donald Trump and towards the conservative court. But over the weekend, we've seen lots of Democrats now starting to attack other Democrats. And this kind of, battle line being drawn between what is being called the institutionalists, folks like Biden and Harris, Pelosi and Schumer and Clyburn, who called the decision called it anticlimactic, which caused what I'm going to put on the other side of this battle line, the progressives, and I use that lightly, who were outraged that Clyburn said it was anticlimactic and who are attacking the Biden-Harris administration, saying that their call for voting in the midterm is not enough, that they should be more outraged, they should be more energized and more emboldened to do something beyond. And that's something, people mention things like broadening the court, expanding the court as one example. What are you to make of this Democrat versus Democrat fight that we're witnessing now?
Well, I think that it is very problematic that we did not see more outrage from, Democrats in Congress. I think that that's what, the majority of Americans really want to see. They want to understand what the plan is. A majority of Americans support Roe v. Wade staying in place. And so, this infighting isn't necessarily going to help anything. I think that ultimately they need to get together behind closed doors and figure out a strategy instead of, fighting on the media and in their personal statements. I think that it will be very difficult for them to get people to come to the polls just based on this one court decision, because we're not going to start to see the immediate effects of it. There aren't going to be as many stories come November of people who have been, have died because of this decision or have, experienced extreme trauma because of this decision. So we might not see the public actually show up and be willing to vote on that one single issue come this November. But I think in the next, few years, we're going to start to see the very serious and very fatal consequences of this Dobbs decision, and it's likely going to have really big political ramifications. It would be great for the Democratic Party if they're able to capitalize on it now, before all of those, ramifications really start to play out. And they were able to get a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate after the midterms and actually pass a federal law. However, even if they do pass a federal law, that doesn't mean that the Supreme Court can't in the future strike that down as unconstitutional. In terms of expanding the court.
Let me stop you before we go on, because you just said something, again, that is contrary to what a lot of the pundits are saying. And many of the Democratic strategists believe that the Dobbs decision and the overturning of Roe v. Wade will be a galvanizing force to drive low propensity voters, younger voters, minority voters to the polls during the midterms. Many voters who, before this decision, they thought perhaps would sit the election out. I know I've talked to a lot of younger women who are outraged to the point of trying to figure out how they can get involved. So why do you think this decision will not have that impact?
Well, I'm just basically going off of, our general sense of midterm elections, which is that we tend to see the party who doesn't hold the White House have much larger turnout rates. That hasn't been true for the primaries so far. So I might be wrong. But, in terms of historically, Republicans are really at an advantage. Midterm elections tend to be, on average, the voters are older, more likely to be white, higher income, all of those sorts of factors. And then, we saw a huge turnout in 2018, but that was when a Republican was in the White House. And so we saw lots of Democrats turn out. So historically, there's not a lot of reason to believe that this is going to change. But, there are elections that are outliers, that go against the historical record. So it's very possible that that will be the case. I think that the Democrats really do need to get together and have a single message moving forward and a strategy for how they're going to tackle this issue in order to get that messaging out so that people who maybe are low information voters or haven't been voters in the past really understand the importance of this particular upcoming election.
And Democrats have been really criticized, Professor, for not making the courts a bigger emphasis and not making the connection between the power that the courts have. As you just said, even if a federal law was passed by Democrats, that federal law will be challenged in the courts by some conservative groups, and it will make its way up to the Supreme Court. And as long as you have a 6-3 conservative court, that court could strike down even a federal law passed by Democrats. Why do you think Democrats haven't made putting on the court, appointing more liberal justices a priority in the way that Republicans have done so strategically?
Well, I think that, some Democratic presidential nominees have made that a very clear part of their campaign. Unfortunately, Hillary Clinton didn't really do that in 2016. Biden talked about it a lot in terms of, he would appoint a Black woman for the first time to the Supreme Court, and he has, done that. But I think that Republicans have been more consistent in that type of messaging. I think one of the reasons why Republicans have taken advantage of that and gone with that is because they understand that a lot of Republican voters are single issue voters, right? So they're voting based on gun rights, they're voting based on their pro-life position. Democrats are less likely to be these sorts of single issue voters. And so I think that a lot of Democratic presidential nominees haven't focused on the importance of the court because of that, because they just figure, oh, well, I'll be losing the people who don't care about abortion as much, or I'll be losing out on an opportunity to speak to those who aren't so concerned about gun laws. But with the Republican Party, they know that so many of their supporters are, in fact, these sort of single issue voters, in which the Supreme Court is a very important component of that.
Where do you think we go from here, Professor Lazat? Again, lots of talk from abortions being made available on federal property, impeaching those senators that lied, trying to get some kind of, and we know the House already passed a bill that would codify Roe, but it doesn't have much of a chance of surviving in the Senate, so it's not going to make its way to Biden's desk. But what do you think is the single most important thing that those people, many of whom are Democrats, but some may be independents and some may even be Republicans, should do in light of the Dobbs decision?
I definitely think they should get out to vote for sure in November. And if this is an important issue to you, you should become, a single issue voter. I think that there's a lot of individuals in the U.S. who haven't been attracted to the Democratic Party for one reason or another. Maybe they're not super keen on the Democratic Party right now because of inflation, even though, that's not President Biden's fault. But I think if this is an important issue to you, you need to put those other issues aside and you need to vote for the pro-choice candidates, which are going to be the Democrats in November.
Great way to sum up this segment. Thank you so much, Professor Lazat, for your work. Obviously, this is an issue that we are going to be talking about from now until the midterm elections. And we'll see, as you said, this might be the issue that galvanizes the base to make this midterm an outlier and reverse what appears to be the trend that the Republicans are going to win the House and even possibly the Senate in November. So again, thank you for the work that you're doing on this issue. All right, my next guest is Joy Cahill. She's the interim executive director of Planned Parenthood New York, and she has been speaking out about the Dobbs decision and the impact that it's going to have, not just on all women, but particularly women of color. Good morning and welcome, Joy. Pleasure to finally meet you in person, kind of in person as we do these days via the internet. But thanks so much for joining me. I know you and I have been on a show a couple of times together. I know you've been out speaking about this Dobbs decision overturning Roe. I really want to focus, though, on Black women in particular, because I don't know if everybody really has a sense about how impactful this is going to be on Black women. Help us understand what this looks like, this Dobbs decision for Black women.
Absolutely, Areva, and thank you so very much for giving me this platform to talk about this very important issue. And anytime I get to talk about me and my sisters, I love it. And so what we know about abortion, a few things, just by the numbers. We know anywhere between 25 and 40% of women will have an abortion in their lifetime before they're 45 years old. We know that already. We know that more than 60% of Americans believe in a woman's right to choose. Right. So how we got here is a whole nother story. And I know you do work there as well. We also know that the vast majority of abortion procedures are conducted on women who are socioeconomically challenged, lower income women. Now, do know that abortion happens across all spectrums of the socioeconomic kind of field. Right. We know that to be true. Rich women, poor women, everywhere in between. But we know the majority are women that are of low income. We know most abortions are with women who already have children, like the amazing story you had earlier. I'm still taken with Ebony's story. So given those things, if we know that most abortions happen with women who are less financially sound, if you will, look at this country. The women that have more financial challenges are Black, brown, indigenous, trans. And so those are the communities that we need to take a look at. So yes, Black and brown women will be impacted by this more than others, because trust and believe, regardless of what state you're in, if you are a wealthy woman of any color, but let's just go all the way, you're a wealthy white woman and you live in Alabama, Ohio, South Dakota, Texas, Missouri, Arkansas, those places that have either total or very stringent bans on abortion, you can get on a plane and fly up here to New York. You can get on a plane and fly to Illinois or California. But think about the typical person that has an abortion. They don't have the means. They may not have a car that they can get across 4 state lines. Some places you can't just cross 1 state line and be in a state where abortion is legal now. You might have to cross 4 state lines. If you have a car, do you have the $5 a gallon gas to get where you need to go. If you're already a mom and they may be small children, who's watching your babies while you take 4 days to drive somewhere to get an abortion and then come back? Who's watching those babies? You may or may not have a partner who's able to do that. And maybe you are married. Can he take the day off? What kind of role is he in? So it's those human stories that I am just struggling, that people who claim to be so into life don't understand.
And let me ask you, Joy, why is it that mostly, or the majority of women, as you just said, that have abortions are low income? What's the connection there?
You know, I don't know that I can be very, very clear on what the connection is. There are stories across the spectrum, and we just happen to know that's there. So if I am already with 2 or 3 children, I'm a one-hit wonder, I got one. But if we have 2 or 3 children and I'm already struggling, I just happen to be struggling, and here's another one coming, then what I need to think about, how do I work that into the mix? But what I want to make sure is clear that wherever on that spectrum you are, socioeconomically or education, whatever it is, my message and the message of my organization, organizations like mine, is the decision about your health care, your sexual and reproductive health care especially, is not mine to make. You get to make that decision. Whether you have a stack of cash or you have none, it's not my place to tell you what to do. And as a healthcare provider and someone in that world, my job is to make sure that sexual and reproductive healthcare services are available, accessible, affordable, and we treat you with the dignity and respect that you deserve.
We know, Joy, that in southern states in particular, states like Mississippi, it is horrifically dangerous for Black women to carry a pregnancy to term. We know those horrible 3 to 4 times more likely to die in childbirth, maternal, mortality rates for Black women, and those rates are even worse in southern states. And a lot of those southern states make it very difficult to access contraceptives. Mm-hmm. They don't have sex education in the schools, so they make it very difficult for women to learn about their reproductive, health, their rights. And at the same time, they're making it impossible in some of those states to have an abortion. What can organizations like yours do to help those women? Because those are the women that I think about. On one hand, they won't even have access to birth control, but now they won't have access even to abortions. And as you said, many won't be able to get from Mississippi to New York or Mississippi to California. What are big organizations like Planned Parenthood and others? What's the plan to help those women?
And as I tee up that answer, let me add a little bit to your question and the facts that you were stating. Many of these states, most of them in the South, many and in the Midwest, these states also have not only the highest Black maternal mortality, they have the lowest rates of education, they have the highest rates of child abuse, child neglect, they have the lowest rates of assistance for families. And so let's talk about the entire spectrum of life and what it means to support that life and be pro-life. So I wanted to add that. What can we be doing? So an organization like mine, interim CEO, as you know, at Planned Parenthood of Greater New York, our C3 side, 501c3 side is about healthcare and provision of healthcare. Our 501c4 side, though, is about activism and making sure that we are sharing the message of who are those people that are running for office who share our values, and what can we do to get those people in office. We educate the community on their voting records and on their stances and how they present themselves and how well they align with our message and our values. So we educate, we mobilize, we galvanize, we fundraise, we have an action fund, we have a pact. So all of those things are already in process, and we just really need to lean into them in times like these. We also encourage other folks that work with us, other organizations, because Planned Parenthood is part of a larger ecosystem of healthcare providers and advocates and funds. We also make sure that we are starting to get people through other organizations like NAACP, get folks registered to vote, to help people understand how important our local elections are, especially in a time like this.
Yes.
Right? Especially in a time like this.
Now, so important because you talk about local elections, that's state elections. These legislators in each state, they are the ones who are going to be making decisions now about women's reproductive health. So oftentimes people don't know who their state reps are. They don't vote in those elections, and they are critically important. So put your C4 hat on, Joy. You've seen this battle that's been, bubbling up over the weekend between those in the Democratic Party that consider themselves progressives, who are attacking the Biden-Harris administration, calling them, institutionalists, saying they're not doing enough. I'm really afraid that this inter-party fight is misguided, and we're missing an opportunity to keep our eye on the ball. But a lot of them are saying, these progressives are saying, look, voting isn't enough. We need to be doing a lot more. What, in your opinion, how do we get folks together on the same page? Because if we're fighting each other, we don't have anything left to fight the Republicans, who are really the enemy in this situation.
Absolutely. And I'll pick up on that by saying, first and foremost, and I hate to do anything that sounds like a compliment, but I tell you what, the other side has been laser focused on this issue. They have been laser focused. They have been strategic. They have been methodical, and they have laid this out over decades to get to where we are. Now, the Democratic Party, of which I am a part, we have done a lot of great work over the decades. Absolutely. But on this one, we've missed some opportunities, I believe. What we have to do, as you said, is to stop the infighting. We need to do old school. I'm not sure where you went to school. Old school lemon squeeze. We need to all get in a room, close the door, and hash this thing out and not come out until we're done and we can present a united front, and not just a united front, but a method and a strategy and a plan, tactical plan for getting people in local, state, and ultimately federal offices that align with our values. I think another thing that's very important is, because we know that in every party, you have people that are pro-choice and people that are anti-choice. We have it across the party. I think we really need to consider two things. One is, this is not a single issue. Now, we're going to stay on the topic of abortion today, I know, but this is not a single issue. As we talked yesterday on air, this is the beginning of the slippery slope. There's a whole bunch of stuff coming after that. So sometimes there are people that need to hear that, so they can take the focus off of abortion for them, because they're kind of bristly about it, and say, well, so you do know contraception is next. You do know gay marriage is next. You do know privacy in the bedroom is next. You do know affirmative action, voting is next. And so you have to find, what is that issue that brings them into the tent? The other side of the conversation, to your first guest, and again, applauding you for bringing her on, is starting to look at that full range. For every abortion, there is a unique story. Mm-hmm. And we have to make sure that we are not focusing on the extremes, both of us, right? So the antis are going to focus on the woman that uses abortion as birth control. They pop around and lay up under somebody different every night, right? And so is there somebody out there in the world? Certainly, because there's somebody of every. On the other side, we're going to focus on the 10-year-old that was gang raped in an alley and, is clinging on to life, and whose body could barely withstand that trauma, let alone the trauma of giving birth. Those are the extremes, and they exist, and they're important. And then there's everyone in between. Ebony's story, my story, other stories. And we have to stay focused on the fact that behind every abortion is a human story, a woman, a person with a life that should be as honored and as revered as the life of the unborn, as the antis would say.
So you live in New York, Joy, you do your work in New York. So your congresswoman for New York, AOC, was one of the folks who was out front over the weekend, doing media, as well as, using her social media account to really, call out Biden. Basically, she said Biden is weak on abortion. She referenced the fact that, in her opinion, he had been pretty much pro-life up until 2019. She called out other pro-life Democrats. How influential in the state of New York is a voice like AOC? How much weight is she carrying in your state?
I do believe that she carries a great deal of weight in that progressive wing. And so I'm an AOC fan. I'm a Detroiter by race. I was raised in Detroit. So, we have one of the squad in Michigan in Rashida Tlaib. Those are powerful voices, because there is a very strong and burgeoning piece of the Democratic Party in that progressive wing. I stay in the place that, as much as I love AOC, do that behind closed doors. We don't need to give our enemy the ammunition with which to shoot us. That's silly. So why don't we figure out how, and I don't believe that is going to pressure Biden one way or the other. If anything, it drives a wedge, and we don't need that wedge. We need to look over across the aisle and see they don't do a lot of outfighting, right? If they do it inside, behind the closed doors, we don't see it because they're not going to give us the ammunition. They're not going to give us the rock to throw at their house, right? So we need to take that same tack. And I feel very strongly about that.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I'm thinking about, we've witnessed in these January 6th committee hearings the most horrific conduct you can imagine of a president. And when you ask Republicans in office, what do they think? No comment.
No comment. Party line. It was a protest. As it keeps coming out and coming out, and it's not.
I mean, they got the talking points and they just reiterate them over and over and over again.
And that serves them, though, Areva. It is serving them well. And that's a piece of the playbook that we may need to consider. And I know for some of us that's difficult because it goes against what we feel is who we are at our core. But this, we know, unfortunately, this is a game. This is all a big game we got to play.
Discipline. I think we should use that word. It's a discipline that the Republicans have and a maturity that they have in electoral politics. Mm-hmm. And I love AOC too, and I love progressives. I consider myself a progressive, mm-hmm. but there is a lack of maturity, and I don't mean in the sense that they're silly.
Maturity and approach.
Mm-hmm. Maturity about electoral politics, mm-hmm. and until we understand that, we're going to miss another opportunity in November. And I know there are lots of other things like the filibuster that people think the president should be doing. But if the president is not there, and as you just said, I don't think we can shame him into getting someplace where he doesn't want to be. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We've got to work with the hand that we've been dealt.
Absolutely.
We have this all or nothing approach. And I'm actually hearing, Joy, on the internet, people saying, why vote? Don't vote at all. It didn't matter. We voted in 2020 and Biden promised us the world and we got, nothing. Or, some people consider that they've got nothing. How do we come back? Those are powerful messages, and some are coming from that, part of the progressive wing, not the part that I don't associate with, but that part who are saying, just throw your hands up and, the Dems, they all suck. So do nothing.
So I would, and politics is really, only my thing as it has to be for my work, Areva. But this is a place where we go to those champions, those trusted messengers in those niches of the party, those progressives. We go to them and say, in the words of the street, get your people together. This is an opportunity for them to carry the message. They're not going to hear that if we're not in their circle. And they do have some good arguments. We have to show them where their argument is weak. We have to show them that if your vote was not powerful, there wouldn't be so many laws on the books, so many things that people are trying to do around this country to make your vote not count, to stop you from voting. So it's like, kind of watch, it's a shell game. Watch the hand and see that your votes really are important. Voting doesn't always get you what you want, but it gets you in a position of some level of power. And we have to make sure that they understand that. And at the same time, we have to make sure that those of us that don't feel that way, we get our folks together, and let's not bash folks who are saying don't vote. Let's bring them into the tent. Let's not create a wedge. Let's help educate them and encourage them and incite them and make sure that when we do get the people in that we voted for, we hold them accountable. We stay in their faces to get from them what they said they would give us. Because unfortunately, I think in our party, what we do is we get them in and like, ooh, yay, and we sit back and wait for the next 4 years. And instead of being in their faces and saying, now that you're here, this is what we need, and this is what we intend to get from you. And I think that's a very important part of the work that we do.
All right, so I have a challenge for you. Can you get Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, who is, he sits between both of those groups, right? Because he's a part of leadership in the Congress, so well respected by Pelosi, Clyburn, and all of the party, the old guard of the party, but yet he's young enough that he also is a part of the up and coming, leadership. So can Hakeem get his people? That's my question for you, Joy.
I think that
tell AOC to get your people.
Get your people. You know what that is? That's right on, because Hakeem Jeffries would be the one. He's right in that sweet spot. And he needs to be the one that helps to pull us together, to get us behind the closed doors, to say, let's do the lemon squeeze old school style and not air our dirty laundry, as our grandparents would say. He's the one. So I think I need to talk to my C4 people and see what we can do about that.
All right, on that note, I have to end this very interesting conversation we're having. I meant to talk to you about so many other things, but I'm just I'm
Next time.
by this fighting because I know it's counterproductive.
It is.
You said there are good points on each side, but we've got to keep our eye on the ball, and we have something really big coming up. And you heard the professor say, look, traditionally the party in the White House loses.
Yep.
We can't afford.
Got to turn that tide.
We cannot. I mean, if we think Friday was a bad day, November 7th, if we lose the House and the Senate, it is going to be a devastating, not day, but decades, because we will have ceded power to a party that has made it very clear what their goals are. We need not guess or wonder. It is very clear. Clarence Thomas gave us a roadmap where the Republican Party, where the conservatives want to take us. And it is not pretty, and it is backwards. And you talked about affirmative action. You know, people are saying things like interracial marriages are on the table, even though, you know, Thomas didn't mention it in that concurring opinion, but it's decided under the same set of principles as, you know, marriage equality. So
the Harvard case in January, affirmative action is coming up.
Absolutely. And if the thinking is the way Clarence gave us a look into his thinking and the thinking of other conservatives on the court, everything is at stake. So, all right, you, Joy, got an assignment. Call me, girl, when
yes, ma'am.
When Akeem accepts our invitation to be the peacemaker, to get these people, go knock some heads and get these folks on the same page, because we can do so much more together.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Joy, for joining me.
Thank you so much.
Keep fighting that good fight. We need you.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Bye-bye.
All right. Great show. I want to thank all my guests, particularly Ebony this morning, for sharing that very powerful story. I want to thank the professor who's doing that work. The research is so important. And obviously, I want to thank Joy Cahill. She's with Planned Parenthood. They are out on the streets every day fighting this fight. And they're also on their political side fighting this fight in the halls of Congress. We need all hands on deck because this is a fight of our lifetimes. And as Joy said, even if you feel like this isn't about you because you don't care about abortions, this is more, much, 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 much more than abortion rights. All of the rights that we enjoy in this country, the freedoms that we enjoy in this country are on the line. And if you care about, you know, what you can do in your bedroom, the intimate acts that you can engage in, if you care about who you can choose to marry, if you care about equality in the workplace, you need to care about this issue. And my words to live by are famously from Joy Cahill, says, get your people. And that means all of us. All of us got some people out there that are tripping right now, who are talking crazy about not voting and who are angry at the Democratic Party and directing their vitriol at Biden and at Harris. That's not where our focus should be. We got to stay laser focused on the task at hand. And the task at hand, as our political strategist Richard Green, who's on the show frequently, reminds us, it's the math. We've got to elect 2+ Democratic senators in these midterm elections. We've got to hold the House. And if we can do that, we can make progress on all of these other issues. So get your people. Be safe out there. Remember, we're all in this together.